I want to use this video to talk about suffering, and I'm going to attempt to make this talk and this sharing a little bit more holistic, and we'll see how that goes. I had this thought of making a list of things that I wanted to touch on, and that quickly I quickly saw that just is not my style, so that's not going to work. So we're going to see how this goes, just kind of flying by the seat of my pants like I usually do, and just hope that I'm able to hit all the big stuff. So suffering, it's a big topic. It's I feel what drives many of us to pursue a spiritual path, to pursue a path of self-realization and liberation, because there's some sense in us that there's got to be something else. There's got to be another way. And I know for me that was such a huge part of my impulse towards this. It wasn't, I was really my spirituality, my spiritual path, my awakening journey was always precipitated by really deep challenge and really deep pain in life. And I would imagine it's likely that way for many. So I suppose where I want to start this is kind of just to clarify what I mean when I use the word suffering. This is something that the Buddha talked about. That was one of the main focuses of his teachings, was an end to suffering. And so what I mean when I use the word suffering is resistance. Suffering is another way of saying resistance to what is. Resistance to what is happening. And there's a lot of layers to this. This kind of unfolds in different stages. So suffering is not the same thing as pain, and that's something that I see confused. So I used to have this idea that when I was awake, that I would never feel pain again, that I would never experience anything challenging again, that I would be able to leave behind my humanity. But that's not the case at all. Pain, physical pain, sensations of physical pain still arise. Challenge still arises. The need to set boundaries still arises. And those things actually become felt much more directly. They're felt very completely directly, because there's no longer anything distracting from the meeting of those things. But the suffering is what drops. The suffering is the resistance to what's happening. So, just as an example, like in the past, say that there was an interpersonal situation that arose, or somebody mistreated me in some way, there would be a psychological suffering that occurred, because there would be thoughts believed that shouldn't have happened, that person shouldn't have done that I was wronged, and that would be looped in over and over and over and over and over for a period of time. That's the suffering. The resistance to this is what happened. This is what is happening right now. And the resistance dropping is the end of suffering. But that resistance dropping, it happens in layers, and it goes, its roots are really, really deep. So suffering is a psychological process that occurs based on believing that we are the person that we take ourselves to be, believing that we are the thoughts that go through our mind, believing that we are the body that we inhabit, believing that we are in control of our life, and its direction. And then when life does not conform to our expectations, to our beliefs, or when life challenges who we take ourselves to be, like the concrete identity that we've formed about who we are, or even the sometimes fluid identity about who we think we are, suffering occurs because there's a resistance to what's happening. We're in resistance to life as it is. And therein lies the creation of suffering. It ultimately goes back to identity, to who we take ourselves to be, who we believe we are. That we are a separate, individuated, divided person who is separate from the environment, separate from God, if you want to use that word. And coming to find the end of suffering means digging through all of the things that we believe ourselves to be and coming to realize for ourselves the truth of what we actually are, which is non-division. We come to see and feel and experience and have a lived experience directly that there actually is no subject and object, me and other. There actually is no internal and external. There actually is no division. There actually is no separation. We come to live from a place of unity or oneness. And that's the unity and oneness is a stage. So that's not like the, I guess, final destination, if you want to call it that. But we come to realize non-duality, which means not two. There never have been two. The filter, so the way that I like to think about it too is that just imagine like a stage in a theater, stage in an audience, and there's a screen or a curtain that's closed. Your identity is the curtain that's separating the space, like the air, the space on the stage and the space in the stadium. But is it actually separate? It's just separate in appearance when the curtain is closed, and then the curtain's open and it's seen that it's actually all the same space. There actually was never a division or separation. That beingness, that presence, is what you are, and it's not a belief that's held. It becomes a living reality. It becomes seen that that's actually what you are. So suffering is created by that sense of division, the sense that I am a separate someone experiencing the world, and when the world does not operate in a way that aligns with who I believe myself to be, suffering occurs. And the feeling of separation, the sense of there being a me or an I or a self, that is the cause of suffering. And this awakening process is an unwinding of that belief. It's asking the question, who am I? Who am I in truth? And challenging, so you may ask that question and your mind may pop off with answers of like, well, I am this name, I come from this family, I do this job, I have these passions, I have these children, this partner. But is that really who you are? If those things were taken away, would you still have the sense of would your essence change? Would your fundamental essence change if those things were taken away? And so awakening is, and the end of suffering, Awakening is the end of suffering. Is the dissolution and the investigation of who am I actually? Are the things that I believe actually my beliefs, or were they handed to me some time ago when I was a child or throughout my life? Am I actually doing the things that I want to be doing? Or am I doing them because that's what I was told I should be doing? That's what it means to be successful. That's what it means to be happy. But is that actually the truth? Is that actually what I am? It's the investigation of that. So there's different stages to the end of suffering. The first being a disidentification with the content of your mind or your thoughts, disidentification with the thoughts that arise in the mind. And this is an interesting one too, because you can think about this. So we naturally attach to some thoughts that happen in the mind and distance from others, if you pay attention. So just imagine that every thought that went through your mind was suddenly projected through a loudspeaker in a public place. Would you claim that all of your thoughts were who you were? Probably, most definitely not. You distance the hell out of some of those thoughts, like, oh, well, I don't know where that came from. That just was here. So naturally, we grasp onto some thoughts that line up with the identity that has been formed, the conditioning that has been instilled in us through our lifetime. And we hold them and take them as what I am, who I am, because it reaffirms and supports the conditioning and the beliefs that we've been handed, and the patterns that we have unknowingly, secretly. And then others are distanced, like, oh, that's definitely not what I am. Say they're like negative thoughts or nasty thoughts or naughty thoughts or inappropriate thoughts in some way, or mean thoughts, judgmental thoughts. Any of that stuff. And then some thoughts are just completely, they float by almost without us noticing. So the thing that makes us grab onto some and not others is conditioning, is identification, is who we take ourselves to be. But in truth, all thoughts are equally weightless. All thoughts are equally empty when it's investigated. When we start to sift through the mind and say, like, oh, is that thought actually true? Is that thought actually true? Like, in my experience right now, can I find evidence of that? Because thought is often an interpretation of what's actually happening in experience, or, living, jumping up into a fantasy of some sort. We come to ping pong between past and future, or create some like imaginary story or an imaginary movie in the mind that isn't actually grounded in reality. And that tends to reaffirm who we believe ourselves to be. So there's the process of disidentifying from the content of the mind or from thoughts. And eventually it's seen that, oh, I'm actually not those thoughts. Those thoughts have nothing to do with what I am in truth. There's something watching those thoughts. There is a presence, a silence, an empty awareness that is witnessing those thoughts. Those thoughts can't be what I am. And that's an investigation that you have to take on for yourself. You can't just hear hear somebody talking about it and take that on as another belief, because that's just another belief. Then you're believing a thought that I'm not my thoughts. But this investigation is very personal. So when I speak about these things, it's not parroting something that other people have said. It's an investigation that was taken in very deeply. Everything was challenged. Everything that I thought I was. Everything I thought I was, I realized had nothing to do with what I am. It was all just a belief. It was a dream. It was the dream of separation. So there's that aspect to it. And that alleviates quite a lot of suffering. So once the thoughts are seen through, the mind is seen through, it's like, oh, that's not what I am. There's a big identity shift, because for most of our lives, we've taken ourselves to be the content of our minds, or we've become so heavily identified with our thoughts and the content of our thoughts, that to see that none of that's actually true, that we're not actually the content of the mind, is huge. It's a huge identity shift. It's very fundamental. It changes everything. It alleviates quite a lot of suffering, in my experience. Like a lot of suffering dropped at that point, when that was really like that stone dropped, and that was grokked on like a body level. And then there's also a way of suffering that has to do with sensation and the body. And that one is really, I found that one, it felt really natural for me, but I found it's been really challenging, because that one's more, so thought is more of an end of like suffering on like, I guess you could call it almost like a private level, because you're the only one who is privy to the thoughts happening. But then when suffering starts to become challenged on like a body level, like the external world starts to be like invited into the process, and that is really uncomfortable. And I'll give an example of like what exactly I mean when I say that. So thought is seen at some point to become a way that we dissociate from just what is happening right now. Or there will be like a sense that we have in the body, like if you've ever had like a gut feeling that you should or shouldn't do something, and then your mind jumps in and kind of talks you out of that and provides all these like very logical reasons why you shouldn't listen to that, or should, go another direction. And then maybe you end up not listening to your gut, and your gut ended up being right. So there's discord there, there's separation. So starting to attune to the body on a moment by moment level, moment by moment basis, and attune to the sensations that are happening, will not only directly challenge thoughts that arise, but it will challenge your entire life, everything about who you think you are externally. So just as an example, say that you just have like a knowing that maybe your job isn't what you want to be doing. Like there's just some sort of like yucky discord in the body that feels out of sync, out of alignment, out of truth in the work that you're doing, or in a relationship that's in your life, in a friendship, in, any number of things in your living situation. But often the conditioning and who we take ourselves to be might be at odds with that, because, just say in an example of like the work. So maybe we were raised in a family where like having a traditional job was like really highly valued. And we came to believe that that was the way to success, that was the way to stability and security, that was like pedestalized. And so in the meeting and the honesty about, well, this just doesn't line up. It just doesn't feel right. It's not in authenticity to continue this job or this relationship or whatever it is. There's a challenging of identity that happens at a very fundamental level. And to start to orient to those sensations in the body and notice when that kind of contraction happens in any given moment. Say you're talking to somebody or engaging with somebody and there's a contraction, or the body starts pulling away and saying like, oh, I don't actually want to be engaging with this person. The conditioning might say to push through that and to be kind, and that a kind person would continue engaging with this person. Whereas what the body, what the truth of the moment is actually asking for is like, hey, I'm actually going to end this conversation. Or maybe actually like I just realized that I'd like to be alone right now. Whatever the truth happens to be. That's really hard because it challenges who we've always taken ourselves to be. It challenges our identity. So suffering happens not only at a level of thought, but on a level of sensation and the ways that we've been habituated to ignore the signals of the body. And this happens in like, start learning to set boundaries too. Like that's been a big one for me, learning to set boundaries. And those boundaries occur by listening to the body, by listening to the sensations. When there's discord that arises, it is an indicator that something's wanting to happen. And it's orienting to that above the conditioning. Like that's part of ending the suffering, is to come into full alignment with the body and what the body is asking for in every moment. So maybe the body is really fucking tired and you're somebody who's been habituated to just work and work and work and work and work and go and go and go. And it's really hard to rest and to put that down because there's been like an identification with somebody who must be productive all the time. There's so many examples of this. There's so many ways that this manifests. One that I have found in myself is like the habituation to just like auto say yes to things. So habituated to like, if somebody asks me to do something, or if I can help them with something, or if I can talk, or like, hey, can you talk right now? Like there's this automatic yes, of course. And that when anything is automatic like that, you can be sure that there's conditioning driving it. Versus like what happens when suffering starts to end. I'm just gonna like start to bring this back around. The end of suffering means coming into alignment in all moments with sensation, the truth of what's coming in through the senses. So dropping out of the mind, out of thought, out of those habituated, conditioned behaviors, and into the truth of what's being asked. So the end of suffering is not some like bliss bunny state that we enter into where we're where we don't know how to engage in the world and we're just floating all the time and we just like become a yes man or yes woman. It's not that at all. It's coming to align with what is being asked in every moment, the truth that is wanting to come forth in every moment, and that will challenge every part of who you take yourself to be. But the end of suffering coincides with like an authenticity that is so free and not giving a fuck what anybody thinks about it. It's the end of division, because those are the things, that conditioning, those thoughts, the belief of who you take yourself to be is what creates the feeling of separation, of division. Like, and every tradition, every mystical religious tradition talks about this in some way. It points to it. You know, in Buddhism, the end of suffering. In Christianity, it's Christ dying on the cross is the end of his separation. His resurrection is the end of separation. You know, in the yogic tradition, there's a coming into union, unity, oneness. And that's not an idea. It's not a concept in the mind. Like, I see this so much peddled in spirituality that there's an attachment to, like, we're all one, nobody's separate. Like, I am you, you are me. And there's this, like, yum, 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 like, yummy thing in that. But then, like, in those communities, I see people like, I am loving awareness, I am loving awareness, I am loving awareness. And there's so much under the surface. There's so much, you know, just like there's a clinging to like oneness, love and light. But that's not the truth of what is arising. What's arising is maybe like a fucking rage, like wanting to burn the world down and that wanting to be met. So that end of suffering, like there's deep suffering in that, in the belief of oneness. The truth of it is much more challenging, is much more confronting, is much more direct. The end of suffering is the end of resistance to what is accepting, not even accepting, coming into unity is just seeing that this is what is. What is here is what is. Life as it is. Without pinging into the mind, without like letting those habituated patterns and ways of behaving just continue to run on autopilot. It's a reorientation out of that and into a full embrace of what is, without the resistance. The resistance is the suffering. And sometimes there's a resistance to resistance. Like, oh, I shouldn't be in resistance. Like, I need to get rid of resistance. I got to fight the resistance to the moment. I have to be present. That's more resistance. So sometimes it's a, you know, like a weird like chain reaction of like dropping resistance to resistance. So this is a very, there's a lot of nuance in this topic, and I could probably keep talking about this, but this video is already getting pretty long. So let me just like take a moment to see if there's anything else that wants to come through. I don't know if you can hear the birds outside. They're having a little party. I think it's blue jays. Yes, the blue jays. Oh, there must be a hawk out there. That's why they're all squawking. It's dropping resistance. Suffering is the resistance to life as it is. And that doesn't mean becoming a doormat. That doesn't mean never, you know, changing anything about your life. Because part of life as it is are the sensations that are arising, and those are the compass. It's coming into unity, coming into alignment, dropping the division with all of it. And that will challenge everything that you take yourself to be. And when suffering is gone, there is a freedom and an authenticity the likes of which you could have never imagined. There's still physical pain, there's still challenge, there's still shitty situations that happen. People will still say and do shitty stuff to you, and you'll have to set a boundary. And maybe sometimes, you know, there will be a sensation that comes up that you might label frustration, and all of that's free. It's free to be as it is. It's free to arise and to fall. And it doesn't define who you are. You cannot be defined by it because it arises within the presence, the beingness, the empty silence that you truly are. It can't define you. And so the end of suffering is coming into, is dropping the sense of division. And it's like the thoughts and all the identities, like the ripples on the surface of a pond, but there's the still water underneath. You come to live in the deep stillness and see the ripples as they are. The ripples are just something that come and go from the depth of the pond, within the pond. I hope I did this topic justice. There's a lot here, and I'm sure I could keep speaking to it, but that's just a bit, and hopefully a little bit more friendly to those maybe who watch my videos sometimes and are like, what the fuck is this lady talking about?